advisor in the Samford Global Office. We're so excited that you guys are here today. Yes, it's combo credit, but hopefully you'll learn more or you're here for more than just that. We're excited to bring a panel of faculty, staff, and student perspectives on the topic of going abroad and how that impacts your faith. So I'll have our panelists kind of introduce a little bit about themselves and kind of where their role is at Samford right now, where they went abroad, and yeah, I don't know. Anything else you may want to add? Tom, you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. I'm Tom Crosby. I'm the Director of UK Programmes and Operations. So I'm based over in London at the Daniel House. So I live there with my wife and dog and son. I should talk about them in different order. So I teach our British history classes over there, live on side of the business side of things. In terms of my background, I actually got my master's degree at Alabama. No one say Roll Tide? There we go. I know we might have some Auburn fans in the crowd. And then before that, I did my undergraduate at Young Harris College in Georgia, where I played soccer. So I've been with Samford for about 5.5 years now. So it's really lovely being back on campus. And I know we have quite a few Daniel House alum in the room. If you have not already, applications for Spring 25 are open. So Professor Kaywell at the top is going to be the faculty in residence joining us over there. So if you have any questions about studying abroad, please do let us know. But that's nothing to do with faith. So, no, it is. So here's Olivia.
Yeah. I'm Olivia Kemp. I am a senior here at Samford. I'm a journalism major, and some things that I do on campus. I'm the public relations manager for the Samford Crimson newspaper here on campus. And I'm from Charleston, South Carolina.
Where'd you go abroad?
Oh, I went abroad to the Daniel House in London, spring 2023.
Hi guys, my name is Emily Jimenez, and I am also a senior JMC major with a public relations concentration. And so I also studied abroad in London at the Daniel House spring 2023, and it was the best. So I'm excited to talk about it.
Hi, my name's David Baines. I'm in the Department of Biblical and Religious Studies. I teach, my field is American Religious History. I teach world religions, history, Christianity, Christian worship. I was abroad in London teaching in spring of 2022 at the Daniel House, and I've taught at the Daniel House once before many years ago on a Jan term. Unlike pretty much everyone else on the panel, I did not study abroad as an undergraduate, which was my fault, but I didn't. So I'll be coming from that perspective. Yeah, thanks.
And I'm Jordan Cummings. I am the assistant director for Samford Global. So I work in our office kind of doing administrative-y type things and planning a few odds and ends. Some of you have maybe got an email from me at some point or another. Congratulations if you read it. I've been in and around Samford for about 5 years, but in the global office since May. So a year or so out of college, moved to North Africa, and I lived in a small country there, participating in a cultural exchange for 6 months. So I studied Arabic and taught English there. And then after that, I moved to a small town in Germany, and I worked there at an international boarding school for 5 years before coming to Samford. So those are my two abroad primary experiences.
Amazing. Thanks, guys. And I'm Laura Molinder, as I said, Samford Abroad Advisor for the Samford Global Office. I'm both a Samford alum. It's a great time to be a Bulldog with the SoCon win, yeah? So Samford alum and Samford Study Abroad alum, and so any of these folks are going to be great resources for you if you're interested in studying, working abroad, interning abroad. Any of these folks are going to help you get connected to the right place. So, without further ado, I have some questions for the panel that I sent them in advance to talk about, and then also y'all have the opportunity to ask questions yourself. So y'all can scan this QR code and submit questions throughout the event, and we'll do our best to get through as many as possible in the allotted time, and then the people from the Office of Spiritual Life will be at the doors on the way out to scan for combo credit. All right, so how about we start with this question. What is one way going abroad strengthened your faith?
I can kick that one off. So I'm a Catholic. Yeah, I'm a Catholic. So when I went to study abroad in North Georgia, my whole background is like I grew up in a town called Coventry, which is about 100 miles north of London. It got bombed heavily during the Second World War, and that's about it. So I grew up there in a kind of a community which was very much based of Irish immigrants, but also Polish immigrants. So my grandparents are Polish, and they came over after the Second World War, and the whole community is pretty much Catholic. So I was just used to this very kind of like regimented view of Christianity. But at the same time, where I also come from is so incredibly multicultural and diverse, with huge Sikh communities, Muslim communities and so forth. But Catholicism was really the only kind of form of Christianity that I was aware of. So when I went to the US, as you know, like Catholicism is fairly regimented in a lot of respects with church and so forth. Seeing how Christianity was different in North Georgia was amazing, really, because I'd never seen people see the pros and cons, but people being so open about their faiths and so forth. Other ways in which it kind of like strengthened my faith in some respects is that my grandfather passed away in my first semester of being abroad in college. So I found faith as an opportunity to reflect upon both his life and also find like strength during that really difficult time when my normal support structures weren't with me in North Georgia. So that really, really helped me.
One of the ways going abroad strengthened my faith was having those quiet mornings where I would just really just spend time in the Word. I was traveling a lot during the weekend. You know, I went to 11 countries, 13 different cities while the time I was there, and I was traveling every single weekend. Tom and I've had conversations about it.
I've not even been to 11 countries.
But I really liked the times I had in the morning, and I'm someone that's very like, I have to do it all by myself. And so going abroad and being separate from the family structure that I have here and the friend structure I have here, and literally just being, you know, my own person over there, and, you know, relying on God and relying on my faith and relying on the people that I had in the Daniel house was very, very, very important to me. And, you know, it took me a while to open up to my shell, but it was very instrumental. So, yeah.
I mean, kind of bouncing off of that, I feel like I was very used to the culture here at Samford and like what that looks like. Like being a Christian in the South, like I'm surrounded by a lot of people with the same background as me, and so like going abroad, I think I expected my faith to look the same, like whether it be like my church routine or like my Bible readings in the morning and stuff. Like that's kind of what I had here, and so I think I expected it there, and that wasn't what it looked like. And so I think at first like I felt a little bit guilty for that. I was like, oh, I'm not like maintaining my routines. Like, does this make me a bad Christian? Like that I can't keep up my routines and stuff. But then I think that God really showed me that like He's not limited to a place, and He's not limited to specific routines. And like I felt so much growth through that, and I feel like I was able to experience Him in a lot of different ways, especially in my workplace. Like I remember having this one class called like Faith in Our Vocation. And, like, that was super impactful to me because, I mean, as someone wanting to do public relations, like, it's not like I'm specifically in the ministry field, but I've always wondered, like, how can I kind of share with people my faith when I'm not explicitly talking about God? And so, like, I feel like I learned so much through that about just, like, how I treat people and, like, my eagerness to help and, like, kindness towards strangers. Like, I felt that so much in London, and just like with my coworkers, like who believe different things than me, like we had great conversation, and just I felt like I was able to kind of minister to them through that. And so like I think I was just like amazed that like God met me in a place where I wasn't sure how He was going to, and so like I just was really encouraged by that, and I think it brought me back stronger than before.
Right. Now, I'll speak more briefly to this in part because my major abroad experience was as an adult. not a young person. My longest time abroad was that semester when I was 50. So one thing I really enjoy about going to London is all of the religious opportunities in terms of visiting churches, visiting different worship services. I mean, for my wife and I, as Episcopalians, going to London is kind of like going to the Holy Land, because here you can go to all these church services of different kinds of churches. And yes, it's a much more secular culture than here, but there are still a lot of Christians and a lot of different worship services. And so that's something for me. One of the, I'll stop there. I have more things to say on your other questions.
Yeah, I think in some ways, kind of the opposite of that. Both places that I lived and worked had very limited options for access to church and community in those ways. And so for me, that really helped to strengthen my faith in terms of realizing what I was dependent on from a comfort point of view in my church experience, and what was actually critical to the centrality of the gospel and who Jesus is and what that means for my life. And so in some ways, having kind of the norms stripped away from, like you come to Birmingham and you can choose any style of worship you might be interested in a lot of ways, then going somewhere and like having to go to a church service that like I did not find particularly interesting, but recognizing, was I dependent on the circumstances to create a sense of the presence of God, or was I expecting God to be there, kind of thing. And that, it really strengthened my faith. It was also a challenge to it in certain ways, but kind of came to grow my understanding in how to experience God in ways that are different from what my norm had been.
Let's take the flip side of that. What were the ways, like an example of a way that challenged your faith, or a situation that you were in, potentially with somebody that challenged your faith while you were abroad?
Oh, where to start?
You don't have to like go in the line either. Y'all can
It's
just
all right.
like shout it out.
Domino effect.
Yeah.
I think time more than anything. I was a student athlete, believe it or not. So I had no time. In the morning I would have class and go straight to play soccer and then homework, and there was no time for me at the time, it seemed, for faith and going to church and so forth. And like Emily's spoken about carrying out your faith in other respects, I don't think I was mature enough at that time to really contemplate that. Also kind of just into another culture, and like not having like a Catholic church at the time, I didn't really find my place, because people were like, it was a Methodist university, and people were so like open about their faith, and we tend to be a lot more private about those things back in England. I went to a service very early on, I don't even know what the term is, but like people were like shouting out and like screaming during the service, and I was feeling bad for the pastor at the time, because you don't do anything like that to a priest, for obvious reasons. So I just found it really difficult to kind of like find my space with regards to that. And then also like, again, coming from like a very, not strict, it's more of a culturally Catholic background. And like Dr. Bain said, London is, the UK is a lot more secular. So like the Christianity is a lot more subtle in terms of Christian values, rather than openly talking about God and the gospel and so forth. So seeing people so open, I really kind of like went into a bit of a shell in some respects. Also people having very drastically different opinions about social values and norms and that kind of thing. I kind of like backed away as a result of that. So I kind of retreated in many ways during my time abroad.
One of the challenges I had was my internship was remote, and so I wasn't necessarily getting out into the city of London as much as many of my friends that were in the Daniel House. And so that came as a blessing in disguise. I had more opportunities to travel around on the weekends. I would have more time to go out and do whatever I wanted in the city, but at the same time, it was challenging because I couldn't interact with people and interact with those different cultures and those different faiths that were in the city of London. And so I found that difficult because all my friends would talk about these amazing conversations that they were having in their places of work, and I just wouldn't have that. But also, like, I was able to really hone in on my time that I would have in the Daniel house, and I would do my Bible studies in the morning or at night, and I would have more time that I had spent with the Lord, and I really was able to get into a routine of that I've even carried now into, every day that I do here in America. But
Yeah. I was, my internship placement, like, I went to work like 2 to 3 times a week, and then we had classes and stuff, and so I think for me where I really struggled was that, like, I mean, we have busy culture here at Samford, like, you guys know what it's like to feel like you have to be involved in everything, and, like, I kind of felt that in a different way there. You're there for only like 4 months, and so I was like, I want to experience everything, like, I don't want to miss out on anything, and so it kind of becomes this cycle of, like, I can't rest, like, I can't take a break, and so I kind of felt a little bit like I was running from thing to thing, and, I felt kind of the toll it took just, like, mentally and spiritually, like, my mind always felt like it was racing, and so I think that was, like, a struggle, and, I really had to try hard to, like, find times to slow down, and a lot of times it looked like going to Hyde Park, which is, like, a 10-minute walk from the house, and, like, I can just really experience the Lord more in nature. I feel like there's something so sweet about, like, solitude and silence and just, like, appreciating the beauty around you, and so, like, I feel like those were the moments where, like, I kind of, like, sought refuge in times where, like, things were crazy and things were busy, and so it was challenging, but I think, like, the Lord was gracious to, like, provide spaces for me to take a breather and, so that I could keep going and that I could have, like, the best semester ever. So it's, like, definitely highs and lows and balance for sure.
I'll just name a dynamic that my wife and I sort of experience, but that I see a lot of students, particularly in study abroad in London, experience, which is that, as y'all mentioned, there's a lot of impulse to travel on the weekends, and of course this is this wonderful opportunity, and my wife and I did it too. And, on the other hand, there could be lots of local religious communities that you could plug into, but then but of course a lot of that is happening on the weekends, and so your tendency is to want to balance. So there was one person our tendency is to want to travel, and so then you are missing out on opportunities for getting to know a different religious community, as Jordan was saying, but still one that might be sustaining. And so that's something to think through about how you're going to do that in advance. We had maybe 1 or 2 students in the house when I was there who I know did plug into a midweek Bible study that was related to a community that they visited sometime. And so that's something that some people find to do, but it's a dynamic to juggle.
So I'm gonna say this in like a vaguely coded way, just because this will go on the internet. But my 5 years at the boarding school, I was there as like a fundraising Christian worker. Read between the lines there. And so I was on support the whole time from other believers and those kinds of things, and grappling a lot with like what the idea of that calling for my life meant, which was the kind of the point of taking that position, was exploring that calling and that idea. But what that meant is that like anything bad that happened felt very like a questioning of your calling, in the sense of like, okay, Lord, I followed you across the ocean and left behind everything like you said to do, and this is not going according to plan. Which, like, hello, read any story and you're like, in the Word of God, and you're like, oh, that's just kind of how it works. But when you're asking those big questions and you feel like you've like made these big moves, suddenly it's not just like a, well, general question of God's goodness. It's a bigger, like more personal question of God's goodness to me. And so I think for me, that was occasionally a pretty big challenge. My last year abroad, I had a death in my family after a month-long hospitalization of one of my nephews. And he had actually been adopted while I was abroad, and so I had really only met him twice. And if you know me in any way, shape, or form, my nieces and nephews are like, that's what I want to talk to you about, and the Lord. But I love them. They're the best. And so that for me was like a huge moment of this invitation to really like ask the hard questions of God and to wrestle with these things. But it was also this like really big piece of like, hey, I thought I did everything right here. I thought I did what you asked me to do, and now I've like lost this piece of my identity that I never even got the chance to know in a lot of ways. And so for me, that was grief plays out abroad in a lot of little ways, and in your sense of identity and knowing, but dealing with such a fundamental piece of who I was really challenging. And having to go about my day-to-day function, which was, like talking to high schoolers about their own faith crises while I'm in the middle of one myself, just was really challenging of like, I don't want to lie to people and say that I've got it figured out, but I also don't want them to be uncertain if they can trust me and my stability in that season. And so like walking through that with like a lot of eyeballs on me at that time was probably the most challenging part of it. I think it was an invitation to know God more in a lot of ways in the midst of grief. And it, ultimately, even as I walk that now, has strengthened faith, but it was definitively an affront to my faith, if you will. So.
Yeah. And unfortunately, we're not absolved from grief here, and we certainly are not absolved from grief anywhere we go. So I think, yeah, Jordan, that's a very poignant thing in that, like, being in a culture away from the familiar and away from your support systems can definitely make the highs and lows feel that much stronger or more, just heightened in your life. Okay, so I'm gonna pause in the middle to take an audience question. Thanks for submitting your questions. Keep them coming. So now that we've talked about like the strengths and the weaknesses of like going abroad and being there, we have a question about coming back and what faith looks like now that you're back, technically with the comforts of home, but maybe the shoes that you once walked in don't fit the same, or maybe the friends that you had when you left are a little different now that you've come back. How did your understanding of faith shift at all when you came back?
Good question. How did my faith change? I think it's just been really tested and kind of stretched. Although I was raised Catholic, I wouldn't say I'm like dogmatic in my opinions or anything like that. I attend various services at different denominations, and I think it's so important to have that compassion and understanding for how different faith communities operate. I think being so dogmatic and rigid in one's beliefs is so myopic and not beneficial for especially living in a global society like I do in London. So being a lot more flexible and open is something that I really learned during my period, especially living in the American South, which is, although we have the same language and so forth, it's so incredibly different to what I was used to back home. So just kind of gaining that kind of empathy really allows me to kind of, especially when students come over with various different denominations and also at different stages of their faith. Everyone's on like a different kind of pathway, and not everyone is so kind of like not towards the end, that sounds like they're dying, but has the kind of all the things figured out. So having that compassion for that, I think, is something that I gathered.
I would say that since I was one of the people that traveled very much while I was abroad, I definitely was not able to get plugged in necessarily while I was abroad, but I definitely loved the conversations that I would have with my peers, and I would talk with my family back home, as little as it may have been with the time change or the time zones. And it was difficult to talk to people back home, but coming back home, I feel like I was able to immediately get plugged in. However, I feel like there definitely was a disconnect because I had went through so much change while I was abroad. I really learned to become more of an adult, I would say. I definitely learned how to provide for myself more so than I did while I was, here at Samford. Because I was put in very, very difficult situations where I was like, oh, I'm stuck at this airport in some other country. I have to figure out how to get through here in a different language. I don't know what I'm doing. So I definitely I don't know how to explain it, but I was able to get plugged in back in my own church, and it was very different, and it was very hard to start conversations about my faith and my time abroad because I felt like, I don't know how to describe this, but you can jump in if you want to.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like coming immediately back from it, it was kind of hard to put into words the whole experience, and I didn't even know how to express how my faith had changed or how I had changed, but I just felt it. I just felt like I had this massive experience, this growth experience, but I didn't know how to communicate that to others. I didn't know how to express to others that I felt different. And so, I don't know, I feel like now, having had almost a year kind of just back here, I feel like now it's just like I said before, it was high highs and low lows, but I feel like it just it grew my heart. It grew my heart for people in general. I just think being exposed to different cultures and being exposed to different people, it can be scary because it is uncomfortable. But I think that's the powerful thing in it. If you always stay in your comfort zone, you're never gonna grow from that. And so I feel like it was a powerful experience to be able to meet different people who had different beliefs from me, and now I have a bigger heart to empathize with those people, like Tom was saying, and just being back here now, I want to seek out different people on this campus. I want to seek out different people in the city and stuff. And so I think it just grew my capacity for understanding of other people and my desire to continue getting to know different types of people.
I don't really have anything to add on this so that we can get to more questions. I'll cycle through. Yeah.
Yeah, I think there were a couple of bigger challenges. One of which was for 5 years I had taking students to church was part of my job, and so I had been attending church services as an adult in charge, driving a bus full of teenagers to church every Sunday, and all these pieces that were related to that. And so our church gathering was very much not everybody in that community was kind of doing ministry on their own, and so church itself wasn't where people did ministry. It was where you got a sermon on Sunday and then you left to do ministry. And so coming back, and then I moved back to Birmingham to start seminary here. And so this is very classic, your first year of seminary, you start getting all this information about what you should be looking for in a church and what this, all the theology beginner steps of this is important and this is important and that is important. And I was just coming back and we're singing all of our songs in English, and I'm used to some of them being in Korean or some of them being in German, and I'm in sensory overload just sitting in any service. Or I'm used to looking around the room and knowing every face in this room, and I'm in a made the mistake of going to a megachurch a couple times and was just what is happening to me? But all that to say, I went from having no choice in where I was going to have so many choices that I was paralyzed. I mean, in making a decision on joining a church, that's the thing they tell you in seminary all the time. Please join a church quickly and get involved and get plugged in. And I did it for almost a year, for my whole first semester. And then by spring semester, I moved back in fall of 2019. So then spring semester was COVID. So I moved back to the States, and then in 6 months later, when I was starting to feel like a person again, the entire world went into lockdown, and I lived here on campus, worked in residence life at the time, so it was me and 30 people on campus, just here. And so all the things that you kind of should theoretically do to help you transition back into your next season were kind of not an option. But for me, that was a really challenge. It's like there was I never found somewhere that felt like it ticked all the boxes, and I had to wrestle with, okay, no place is going to tick all the boxes, and you have to figure out what you need, where's a place that you can serve in the season and be fed and feed others. And so, like, for me, that was a big piece of coming back. I had moved enough times that I'd kind of gotten used to figuring out how to tell my family, like, yeah, this thing happened, and watch their face go, oh, and then they didn't really get it, and that's okay. But I had then been involved in enough communities of people who had that shared experience that I knew I could call and kind of process with others. There's a term called hidden immigrant, and it's kind of the idea of, like, after you've had these kind of big experiences, or you move into a culture where, like, visually there's nothing distinct about you from that culture, you look like you could fit in pretty easily, but from your inner person is quite different. You are truly an immigrant experiencing all these new things, and I sometimes felt that way coming back to the States, of like, I like had to think of myself as an immigrant to the United States and like relearn how culture here worked. And so being thoughtful about it helped that transition of like not just assuming things were going to be like, I've had all these changes, so has my community. Like, as long as I've been out of my community has continued on. And it's easy, I think, to, like, when you're out of something, assume it stayed at the place it was when you left, but it doesn't. And so being thoughtful about relearning when I came back in helped a lot, and I think is a thing that people think a lot about preparing to go. They don't always think about preparing to return, and it's a big piece of it, for sure.
For our, I guess I'll call you educators in the room, so Jordan, Dr. Bain, and Tom, question for you, since you guys were more in supporting roles of students in, yes, academic settings, but also like in faith-based settings, how has that looked for you, and what has that experience been like, being kind of like a support to students, and what is that, maybe an anecdote or an example of a time that really stuck out to you about, maybe it was a student that approached you with a faith question, or maybe there was a student going through a certain difficult situation and how you guided them through their bigger questions. Yeah.
You go.
You go. Okay. Well, I mean, I would take a little bit to answer that in a slightly different way and think about some of the general the principles that we think about in terms of cross-cultural engagement and whatnot. I mean, I think one thing that is helpful in well, Jordan was just talking very appropriately about preparing to come back and thinking about that. But in preparing to go and think about different faith communities is to, even here at home, to be used to being in some ways involved in different cultures, involved in slightly different expressions of Christianity, so that when you're going into a different environment, you already have some sense of, okay, well, I know that at my friend's church they do things this way, and I appreciate that for what it is, and sort of at home there, and at my church we do things this way. And I say that as someone who actually, people always look at me weird when I say this, who grew up in two different churches, two different denominations, which I did, and so I've sort of had that as part of my life. And then also, I'll mention something that I'll always mention at the beginning of a world religions class, which is that when we're encountering these different religions, there's three challenges, and they can be true when just encountering different people from faith perspective or different expressions of Christianity too. And one challenge is you run across things that just seem really odd. That just seem, you have hard time getting your head around, and just to acknowledge that, and yet to be sort of deliberate about, well, why does this really make sense to them? I mean, to use a non-religious example, what is so attractive about beans on toast? I mean, it really is good. I want to convince you of that. But whereas students in London, like beans on toast, why do you do that? And not that people really eat beans on toast all that much.
I think you eat it more than me.
I've never eaten before in my life, actually. But anyway, but to think about, are these foods, you go somewhere and people eat insects, or you go here and people don't talk in church, or they talk a lot in church. Tom was talking about that. And then also to think about, there'll be things that just seem sort of wrong, but again, why do these people think that this is a good thing? And then also, really with the last part of this triad that I mentioned, world religions, is where people are talking about something that they know they're not. This is this other religion, and then when you see things in that you like or that seem to speak to you, oh, wait a minute, is this a crisis of faith? And I would suggest no, it's not, because it's important to, we're all humans, and so there's common human elements in different religions, or there's different frameworks we can use to appreciate those different things. So I hope that was helpful. Yeah.
Yeah, I think one of the gifts of my time in Germany was things that seemed really distant, so like global issues or questions of faith in other places, were gathered around my dining room table every night. And so like I had a student who had grown up in Paris her whole life, pretty much. Her family worked with Muslim people there, and most of her friends were Muslim. She spoke French and Arabic almost equally because of her day-to-day life prior to coming to this school. And the Paris attacks, the wave of terrorist attacks happened while we were there. And listening to her just process, like her family was from Texas originally. And so like listening to her process like her aunts and her uncles and her grandparents online, and like their way of talking about that issue, grappling with, but that, like, those are my literal neighbors, that's my best friend, that's, that person, made, really forced me to, when I'm, hear a headline, when I hear this thing, and the push now is really towards like reaction, to sit and ask some questions from it, and to remember that, the names aren't just names on a paper, but they're real people who go to the laundromat and do laundry next to somebody, or sit and have tea together in the afternoon with somebody, and to bring the extremes like into the normalcy, and to remember that was a real gift for me as a person kind of getting to watch that happen across multiple people. And I think watching students, these were high schoolers, so like there was a lot going on with them in their faith in terms of most of them had lived cross-culturally for a significant portion of their life due to their parents' work. And so the questions they were asking, it was pretty easy to blame God for because, that was the calling on their parents' lives. And so God's the one that uprooted them and brought them to this place. And then now they're at a boarding school, most of whom really wanted to be at the boarding school, but it's still a weird thing to be 16 and think you're kind of independent from your parents, when in reality you just have a 27-year-old telling you to go back and clean the bathroom again, kind of thing. So like their day-to-day life just felt like the stakes were raised a little bit from what I had been around before. But for me, that was such a gift of getting to then walk through them and to not have to have the answers, but to journey with them as they asked questions and sought answers. Whether or not they were, nice and neat answers by the time they left me was pretty hit or miss, but a lot of really, it's a gift. I think anybody that ends up in teaching, like watching people be curious is a huge part of that. I love curiosity as a framework for experiencing God in other people and in other faiths and in other ways is not to say you can't be critical of things that are different from you, but you have to do it from a place of openness and curiosity to understand. You can have an opinion that something is different, that something that's different is wrong, but you can't have that opinion until you've explored why it's different. And does it feel wrong just because it's different, or does it feel wrong because it's, an objective different, an objective wrong? And so asking those questions, I think is such a gift, and I think for Samford students, like not being afraid of that, not being afraid of hard questions that are gonna come up. When your sense of normalcy and your sense of identity is uprooted, whether you think it is or not, it is. Even in a place like London that's pretty culturally close in some ways, you're still uprooted from your day-to-day normal, from the faces you get used to seeing, even if you don't talk to them. Samford's a small campus. You kind of, even if you don't know somebody, you tend to know faces. And that familiarity being upended, it's gonna make you ask some questions, and I think that's a good thing. I wish more people got to experience that, and I think it's okay. We often feel like we have to have every answer, or be really sure of ourselves before we go. But I think being willing to go with questions and being willing to go and ask questions is a gift, and I think it's a way that God has invited people to know him more. That's, to me, never a bad thing, even if there's some meandering along the way that you feel a little uncertain about. You get on the right path.
I can add just a couple of things. I think what Jordan, Dr. Baines, the whole emphasis on being curious, I think there's nothing much more frustrating, and this has happened very few times then, being encountered by different practices, whether that be in religion or culture and so forth, and then someone just saying, well, that's stupid. Really it's so important to be so open-minded and also curious, like, rather than saying that's stupid, thinking about why is that faith operating that way? Why do they think that? Why do they practice their religion in that way? And that leads to so much understanding and also compassion, also shaping your own faith and journey, and not being so rigidly dogmatic in kind of how you go about things. Again, I can see kind of like how it happened, just like I just grew up in the solely Catholic area and didn't really understand kind of how Christianity was enacted. Obviously, Samford has a particular approach to religion, which is not necessarily shared outside the South. And you will be confronted and you will be challenged in a very secular society such as London. But that also extends to other parts of the US. So being able to kind of have dialogue with people about what you believe in, I think is so important. So one thing in which kind of how like faith is at the Daniel House in such, like, I'll be honest, like, during a regular semester, there are no real, like, faith activities at the house. I believe that faith is very much like a personal thing, and I'm struggling with words, in enacting your faith through how you are. So infusing that within my values, trying to be compassionate, trying to be empathetic and so forth, rather than kickstarting class with blah, 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 what do you think of this, and I don't believe in kind of like imposing religion in that way, but actually living that. And I think it's incredibly important. We were talking about this a few months ago with my colleague Joe, who spoke about the term seeing Christ in others. So even if someone is a Muslim, if they're a Sikh, if they're a Hindu or Buddhist and so forth, seeing kind of like Christ-like values within them, and again, gaining that compassion, because approaching it just with like a hard no, saying like, no, this is the way, I think is exactly the opposite of what we're trying to instill in everyone. So open mind, all to say, is important.
Yeah, and one of the questions was just about like Christian community, specifically at the Daniel House. I will say, should you choose to go on a semester program at the Daniel House, like there are opportunities to get plugged in a local community, as Dr. Baines said, but that's kind of you're on an individual prerogative basis. However, if that's a priority to you, there's plenty of opportunities to do it. There's also some opportunities for combo credit while you're abroad, so that's kind of a faith component as well. Have students done Bible studies in the past at all together, Tom? Or
Yes, there was a Bible study led by students because I kept accidentally walking in with my dog Larry and interrupting it just because I thought nothing was going on. So Bible studies have been led. Our current faculty member, Professor Hall, is leading a cadre, all looking at Tolkien and faith. And there are so many communities within close distance of the house. So actually this semester there's a group that are really plugged into a church in Mayfair, which has a lot of different international students from different universities. So they have group dinners, group discussions on the Bible and so forth. So it's a way in which you can find your own London. And also I know there's a Samford bubble here, and there's also a Samford bubble in some respects with regard to the house. Everyone's having this shared experience and experience in London together. So getting out and tapping into a different community is so important, both for some respite of the house, but again, also thinking about how others operate and practice their own religion. So there are so many different places that you can go. You can even go to St. Paul's Cathedral and just listen to evensong at 5 o'clock, or go to Westminster Abbey or so forth. So there are so many places. Dr. Baines, I really admire him for kind of getting out and about and visiting probably every church, or most of them, within a 5-mile radius.
Well, I mean, walk by, I'm sure,
Yeah.
probably. 5 miles is a bit far, but and we didn't go to every cathedral in all of England. But yeah, tremendous. Yeah, I have this whole alphabet of London churches online, architectural, if you're interested. Features and stuff there. Silly. It's really good. But anyway, yeah, I mean, if you go there, I mean, there's tons of people you can reach out to, me and others, to, even though I'm not in London, know about churches and plug into a variety. Yeah.
But also, like Emily was saying earlier on, faith looks so different in so many ways, especially within Christianity.
Just being in the park and just having that time to yourself, where I have my deepest reflections is while running with my dog. There are a few existential crises, but it's a great time. So having that time and just being in nature and living your faith in that respect, you don't have to be in a church, you don't have to be in a Bible group to be in awe of everything that's been created. You could be in the British Museum looking at all the artifacts which were stolen from the rest of the world and just admiring everything that's been made.
reflecting on the 10 Commandments,
Yeah.
looking at stolen
We may give them back.
Big maybe.
Yeah.
Big maybe. And the great thing is, a lot of these folks have Daniel House experience, and that's because, it's Samford's owned and operated study center, but Jordan, myself, and some other folks in the Samford Global Office have plenty of abroad experiences outside of that. So there's plenty of hope there for finding community, and either finding a church or just finding support while abroad in other areas of the world too, not just the Daniel House. So if you're thinking, I'm interested in going abroad, or I've been abroad but it was somewhere completely different, there are folks here that can talk with you about those experiences too and kind of help you read, process, or process things as you re-enter back or plan to go. Okay, so we've got about 5 minutes. I want to finish with one last question, and then hopefully our OSL folks will be there to scan for y'all's combo. But my last question to our panel is, what would you say to an audience member, a student, a friend, somebody who is hesitant to go abroad due to faith-related concerns? They're like, oh, the Daniel House semester looks cool, or a May term looks cool, but what's that going to do with my faith? How am I'm going to be removed from my church community here? God forbid something happened to my family or friends back home while I'm away. What do you tell them about going abroad if they have a faith-related concern?
In thinking of faith, holistically, I don't think you would ever get a better chance of understanding your vocation and calling than when you are removed from your home culture. A plug for the semester. There's an internship component to studying abroad. And alongside that internship is a course which is all based around vocation and calling, where with my colleague and whichever faculties and residents, students sit down to explore their strengths, their values, looking at what they want to do and where God really sees their strengths being and what you want to go and do out in the world. So being removed from your home culture, ripped away in many respects, you get a sense of understanding what's important to you and what you should do with your life. So I would say there's no better place to kind of explore who you really are than being abroad.
You said exactly what I was going to say. I definitely learned a lot about who I was, and I got to tap into my faith and making it stronger, and it was one of the best experiences of my entire life, and I loved every second of it, even though it did have its highs and lows. But I do love the person that I became. I love the independence that I learned and all the experiences that I got. So
Yeah, I mean, I think just being open to it and like taking the leap of faith and knowing that like that faith will be rewarded and like you will be met where you are. And so like I think that so many gifts came from it. And so I think just like taking the leap of courage and being like, okay, like this is scary for me, but I think that I could grow from this, and like trusting that that will happen, and it will. And so yeah, I mean, like it's so much personal growth, so much spiritual growth, and like even if you don't feel it in the moment, like it is kind of a blur while you're there, like reflecting on it now, I can like see so much growth from that. So I think it's totally worth the risk. Like the benefits like far outweigh like what you're giving up here at Samford. Like I think it's really worth it to go.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything they said. In terms of going, you're going to move anyway. You're not always going to be in the same context, in the same family, in the same church. I mean, most Americans aren't. And so, I mean, I think about, I didn't study abroad, but I went away to college, not in my home area. I went further away to grad school. I was even more introverted there then than I am now, so I had even more concerns about that then. But and so I had to learn that, okay, yeah, I mean, particularly when I went to grad school, I had really strong church communities in college, and I sort of expected to be able to find the same kinds of things at the grad school because it's another American big university. But it was in a different culture, and things were just different. And so I had to sort of learn to adjust, or that, hey, I'm not going to get this from this denomination because they're not doing things exactly the same. And so go ahead and do that in London or do that wherever as an undergraduate, because you're going to have these transitions. So you might as well dream big and go far, and not just to New England, but to old England or beyond.
I guess I would frame this in two different ways. One is I think we all wrestle with a little bit of like FOMO for if I leave and I've been really involved at a church, maybe I volunteer pretty regularly, or my small group is gonna get closer without me while I'm gone. Yeah, a little bit that's gonna happen. I would rather you kind of have your feet on the ground about that. But the gift is like you come back and you now have something new to offer the church. You have a perspective that they didn't have access to before. Which, if the ways that we're gifted is for the church, then you've got a new tool in your tool belt, right? Like, you're gonna miss some things. It's gonna feel awkward when you come back. They've had these shared experiences and you've had this really other experience, but it's an opportunity to invite people together and to join back in and hear how they've grown and learned, but also share how you've grown and learned without, being the person who's like, well, I study abroad the whole time. But related, like, it is scary, and I don't want to be the person who you like say, I'm afraid about this, and maybe like, well, don't be. That's not particularly helpful, I think. But what I want to encourage you with is, like, Scripture teaches us that God says if you seek Him, you'll find Him. And so I think there is some fear in leaving, and that's good and okay. But there's promises too, right? Like we can hope in going abroad, if I seek God, he'll be there. He'll be found. He might not be in the places I thought he would be. He might look a little different than I thought. But God will make himself known to us, right? And so that's such a gift, right? Like an opportunity to know him. And it is scary, and I don't think anyone can tell you something that's going to take the fear away. But I hope that you hear something that says maybe the fear is worth it in that process. And I used to just, pray from Psalm 139:5, like, God, hem me in before and behind. Like, I want to go and I want to be curious and I want to explore, and I want you to be the one who directs the path to who I need to meet and where I need to be and what I need to learn of you while in this space and in this season. And he's been faithful to do that. Sometimes the parameters were a little wider than I wanted them to be. I would have liked a little more shepherding along the way. But,
Right.
you make it.
And one thing you said just reminds me of another sort of story. Yes, your line about, well, you go away and you come back. And yes, you go away for a semester your junior year, you will come back. But that just reminds me of one of my dearest college friends who, after we graduated from college, she went away to teach abroad in England. And she actually never came back, and has had all these different career paths, somewhat, but her new world opened for her. And she's a pastor in London now, at Wesley's Chapel. And so, there are these kinds. You never know what's going to happen, and opening new doors opens new opportunities.
Thanks, everybody. Yeah. Can we have a hand for our panel? Thanks y'all for coming. There should be combo scanners outside. That's what OSL told me. I hope they're there. Go in peace. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
They're there.